Hey everyone, just want to run through the Project 2 key considerations list, as I know that this is something that you see a lot from me in feedback for your different tasks that you've been doing. And they are generally pretty self-explanatory, and of course if you ever have any questions about them, you can always reach out to me. But I wanted to review each of these points just quickly and then reconnect it to an example of a past student final submission for the project so I can address them directly and show you some good examples or effective examples of a final project submission. Okay, I'll just show you one student's work. So in the key considerations list, walking through these, the first point here is uses sizes and weights judiciously, okay? So now in tasks 1 and 2, you're only allowed to use one size or one weight, right? And then in task 2, you can use one size and two weights. So you're still keeping the sizes, if you start at 8.5 points or 9 points, then everything is going to be that size, okay? And that's a nice constraint, in the beginning to start and have us focusing solely on the difference between, number one, the difference between two weights and how that can add emphasis and create contrast, in addition to how to work even within one size and one weight and still make a dynamic layout, okay? And so there are a lot of ways to do that. And all the videos that I walk through, I show you a variety of examples already, so you should by now have seen many examples of all of the tasks. Um, and so there's no one or no one way to do it or approach it, but there are some universal principles to consider, and that's what the key considerations are. Okay. So at the end of the day, the main thing is that you're taking the extra time to detail and refine your typography. You're not using sizes, which is point 2 here, that are considered in between. Helvetica is a big typeface to start with, so if you use it at 11 point, 12 point, 13 points, etc., for your text size primarily, I'm talking about text size, then it's too large. It looks chunky on the page. It doesn't work well. Now for your display type or your titles for, say, Magma Manchester, for example, you can use much larger type than that, but you want to typically keep your text type size in the 9.5 and below range, okay? 10 is getting large, and that's about as large as I would go, and even that is too much. So I would say always consider using half, fractions of points too, 9.5 versus just 9, or 10, 9.75 instead of 10, etc. Same thing goes for your leading or your line spacing. Okay. Generally speaking, I say avoid centered alignments. I still see a lot of these for this particular client, but by now it's a design bookstore, and their clientele is it's basically designers like us, and like we are, and essentially you want to keep the layouts dynamic, contemporary feeling. It's okay to go classic too. So centered alignments typically have a more traditional or classic feel. They maybe lack a little bit of a dynamic feel. So you want to use them very carefully, if at all. A lot of this still I see that type and elements are too tight to the margins, or other, like if you have a shape in a layout, the type is stuck up against it. You want to have room for the type to breathe. Okay. Baseline shift on the parentheses, I do a whole video on this. And the only area you need to worry about that is in the phone number. And if you do it one time, it only takes a couple seconds. If you shift the baseline up on the parentheses so it's centered with the 0, then you can copy and paste that type for all of your tasks and you already have it done. I still see most people not doing this, which is surprising. Baseline shift is a simple adjustment that I show in the video how to do, and this is one of the first things I look for in your layouts. And if I don't see it, I know you're not detailing those little those factors that are important, and that will ultimately deem your grade. So it's an easy avoidance, easy way to avoid that and have a more considered care and detail in the work. Add a bit more leading when dealing with numbers. So like in your phone number block, like if you have the phone number and then you have the address above it, sometimes you have to go in and add a little bit of extra spacing in that line where the numbers are, because the numbers are a little taller and it can start to feel like the spacing is uneven. So you can optically adjust the line spacing in that line with the number to make it feel a little bit more equal. Okay. And again, like I said, adjusting sizes and spacing by fractions of points, that's crucial. Always refine your lighting. So never are you going to use default line spacing. Really in any layout, not even just this project, it's typically not something you want to do. Line spacing is one of the first things that you start to adjust, whether that's in your headlines or your text. It's a very simple tweak. And usually for text, it usually means opening it up a bit. Okay. For headlines, it actually will mean, let's say you have Magma Manchester and you have those on two different lines. You're actually going to decrease the space once the type gets larger, like if you're using it for a headline or display type. Okay. Always be aware of your letter spacing. Kerning is important. That's basically adjusting, the space between a pair of characters. I've in past in project one, I had announcements where I posted a kerning game. That was kind of a cool exercise and taught a lot about that. So hopefully by now you know what that's about. Any questions, you can let me know. This is a big one too. Thinking about the content as a unified whole. So you don't want to have the text elements all kind of randomly set up on the page with different styles, different sizes, etc. It's okay to use different sizes to contrast things or different weights, but you don't want to have them seemingly randomly applied. Okay, so you typically, I will think about having the title or the Magma Manchester or something. You want to have a central element. Maybe it's a shape in some of your later tasks, but you have a central element that everything is revolving around. Okay, negative space is a good thing. Okay, let there be room for things to breathe. All right. Everything should look intentional. Again, that's where the sketches come into play. Have a plan ahead of time. And if you just blow through the sketches and get right on the computer, a lot of times things don't look finalized or dialed in or like they have a clear plan. Okay? And rushing through the tasks ultimately makes you more work. If you take time on the front end to refine things, like I said, even something as simple as the baseline shift on your parentheses, you put a little front end work into things, then you can benefit from that, copy and paste, and everything's already dialed. So if you try to rush through these, it'll make you go back and have to refine and do things again, and you'll just do more work at the end of the day. Again, let the pages breathe, don't make them too tight, and the possibilities really are endless here. So if we look at an example like this here, now this is one student's work. I'm going to show you the 7 tasks, and essentially, so this is slightly larger than full size, and I'm looking at it as a PDF, so the type may look a little bit funky. If I do it that's actually at 100% size. The only thing to be concerned about here is that, again, there might be the type might display oddly, but I'll keep it at 100% to get a sense of the scale of everything. But you can see this is their one size, one weight. They've kept it really simple. It's all the regular weight of Helvetica, all the same size. The line spacing values are the same, so there's no difference in line spacing. They've kept everything really consistent. They have this sort of central point here that everything is, aligned around, and it's sitting in the space proportionally. They set this up with a grid so they know exactly where it is in the space, and it feels, it's simple and straightforward. But the angles, the different axes, provide some dynamic movement to the layout. Here's task 2. So it's nice to go between those two because you see, okay, these are essentially the same size. But now you see one size and 2 weights. Okay, so what they've decided to do is call out the name and the subjects, which is kind of handy. And then, the thing to notice here is that they've opened up the line spacing on the boulder type, and just set it off from here, and it still looks good. It still looks intentionally done. And so there's, their key here is that they're essentially wanting these to, align pretty much at the bottom here, and have this nice central axis, and then the flush left type against the flush right type is kind of a nice, the contrast of those two alignments provides some nice structure. One thing that you have to be careful about, this is a little bit of a short line for the paragraph, but I think the way they've set it up here looks good. And one thing that they've done really well with here, they've shifted their baseline in the parentheses, as we talked about, so you can see this, the 0 is centered in there with the parentheses, and the little bit of extra space they added where the numbers are makes this feel more consistently spaced versus too tight. Nicely done. This is their task 3. Now they can use any size, any weight, and with lines. And they've done a simple line through the middle, which I think is always tricky. If you divide the page in half, it's automatically hard to work with depending on how you do it. But the way they've handled it here by dissecting it, bisecting it through at an angle, and then shifting off the title type. This title type here, this is a really cool technique. And so I think without that, if you were just to have this split in half and you have stuff over here and stuff over here, it'd be far less dynamic. But the fact that the type moves through that center point and is kind of impacted by it, and that slight shift happens, and they have Manchester here, they track that out a lot. And again, so your central element is this, Magma Manchester, okay? And then everything revolves around that. These are the same size and spacing, as each other, these three blocks here, and they feel connected to this larger thing, which is the central focus, and thereby it feels like a unified layout. Okay. Here's task 4, any size, any weight, and then you're doing reverse type. So you can do shapes. Here they've done type. They've called out art from their subjects list, made that larger, and reversed the type for Magma Manchester and the address out of there. Again, here now is your central element, the ART and Magma Manchester. That's your focal point. And then these elements just work around that, in almost in support or as a secondary element. And they're all the same size and same line spacing, you can see. Okay, nicely done there. Here's any size, any weight using color, task 5. So what they've done here, now this is a key point. They've used the type, the magma type essentially, to create this really interesting background. It's typographic, almost slightly geometric. And because that, because that is the primary focus, now they're in, here the title as well, and with the URL, they're thinking, okay, I have that going on, a very dynamic layout happening. Now I'll keep this very simple. I'm just going to do flush, right, clean, all simple, a little bit of line spacing added. All my details are considered, my baseline shift in the parentheses, everything's dialed in. I'm going to call out art a little bit more, and they're good to go. Okay, so that one works well also. Now task 6 is basically go for it. It's just going to town and exploring. So, and this is the one task where you don't necessarily have to see the paragraph, you don't necessarily have to see the subjects list, etc. So what they've done here is they've just simply added the URL, the name, and all that information they've taken and repeated as just almost this textural typographic treatment, which is really cool. And from a design standpoint, if you're thumbing through a design magazine or something, you see this ad, you're going to be intrigued and go, what's it about? You see the URL, you'll look that up and you get a sense of what it's about. Even here you get little hints, film and animation, design, digital design, typography, etc. So you know this is something design related, okay? And then I need the URL and it takes me there, okay? Last one is image, any size, any weight using image. And there were a lot of images explored by this student. This is the one they ended up with. For kind of art and photo, they really love the contrast in the image and the way they could play with the type. And again, because you have this central figure in here, and this really, the orange background and the contrast of everything, and the type, so it's really like this type of treatment and the image are the focus. And then this all just works simply in support of that, okay? So that's the key thing there. I think that those are 7 examples of what I would consider pretty solidly done, tasks 1 through 7, okay? I'll show you another one here just real quick. Task 1, and one size, one weight. All right, so an interesting way to create texture. They've used caps. They've used. Here's an example where they have done a centered layout because they have this element in the center here. I think that this one can be improved structurally, but I like the way they use texture here in this round element. And I think that because you have this flush left over here, and then you have this center and this center, there could be greater unity between those. But this is really nicely done. Task 2. Really nicely done. One size, 2 weights, and so they've used all caps to create the illusion of a different size, but they're all the same size here. And again, around a central axis, using these various angles, it provides a little bit of dynamic feel there. Any size, any weight, using lines or rules. They basically use these lines here, both in positive and negative, and have the type reading upward here vertically, which is cool. Much better than stacked, so not having the M, A, G, M, A, reading it like vertically stacked. They're actually running the baseline vertically, which is much more desirable. And all the other small type, you can see everything is then the same size and the same line spacing, okay? In support of the, these lines and this element or the central focus, these act in support. Task 4, any size, any weight, using or reversing type. My main complaint about this one would be to open up the leading here, and also to not have this widow at the end here. Okay, so that's one thing. But the structure is good. There's still unity, even though there's several different things going on. It feels like here's the these angles, and then this type is sort of like the key, and then they have these alignments happening, which just work on these axes. Okay, there could be refinements to this one, but it's done pretty nicely. Here's the color, pretty simple and straightforward. Again, here's your main element. This is the real subtle use of color, and then all the other type is the same size, same weight, same spacing. They just use all caps here for the paragraph, and this is the central element that all these other elements work around. There's the experimental version. You can see they've almost made this type look cut up. That's the central focus. They just simply run the name, and then this works very basically. But again, you can see all the details. There's line spacing done. The baseline shift on the parentheses is done, and the last one is their image one. It makes sense for the client. The fact that they're the design bookstore, they focused on this art sign. That's the same focus. I mean, that's the central focus with Magma Manchester as part of the title, and then simply setting this all same size, same weight, same spacing, good to go. Okay, so that's another example. Hopefully that's helpful. Any questions, let me know.